The Age of Decadence is a Roman-themed post-apocalyptic CRPG by Iron Tower Studio. It features choose-your-own-adventure style dialogue and a tactical turn-based combat system. Here are my initial impressions. The Age of Decadence is fundamentally a game that doesn't hold your hand. It has no difficulty settings, plenty of walls of text, and barely any tutorial. It's also very hard. Those familiar with the genre will be able to settle in with a little experimentation, but CRPG neophytes will find no quarter here. That said, The Age of Decadence is quite different from a traditional CRPG in many respects. For example, it tells you right away that this is a game where combat is not the main focus, not unless you want it to be. Even in Fallout, which is a clear inspiration for this game, a pacifist build just means running away a lot. The Age of Decadence has turned its dialogue system into what amounts to a choose-your-own-adventure minigame, replete with skill checks and attribute checks. And that's fantastic because it means that the shift away from combat as the primary means of conflict resolution is handled in a way that doesn't leave the game feeling bereft of gameplay. That said, there are some rare situations where you are forced into combat that is pretty much unwinnable. For instance, I was doing a quest for the Boatman of the Styx, the assassin faction in Age of Decadence, which involved dressing up as a beggar. And because I had bad impersonation and critical strike skills, along with no money, every option I could take led to combat. But I wasn't wearing any armor because I was dressed up as a beggar, so the enemies easily killed me in 2 or 3 turns. Now, it makes sense that you need those kinds of skills when doing quests for the assassin faction. I don't think that's the problem. What makes me wonder is why the assassins would even hire me if I was so bad at doing the job. The game has skill checks for everything else, but strangely the guild leaders don't seem to care about your skills when they accept you as a member. And this quest isn't even the worst offender at all. You can at least anticipate the skills you would need or simply pay up if you have the cash. Some quests just don't give you any way out other than dying and reloading your game. Ultimately, this just leads back to the idea that the Age of Decadence doesn't hold your hand at all. If you want to join the assassin faction as a terrible assassin, you are free to do so, even though it's not the best idea. The character creation in the game seems to have the same policy. It's very robust but not easy to get into because the way it's designed is somewhat deceptive. Although the attributes are straightforward, the skills are not. The game has 3 pools of skill points. Combat skill points can only be spent on combat skills, civil skill points can only be spent on non-combat skills, and general skill points can be spent on all skills. This division between combat skill points and civil skill points suggests that you can have at least minor competence at both aspects of the game, because even if you choose to specialize in one aspect, you have some points that you are forced to spend in the other. But that's not true at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Although you can try to straddle the line between combat and non-combat skills, investing points into more than 3 or 4 skills means the game's difficulty will outpace your character's growth. As a result, it's best to go all in, choosing one side or the other. Again, the player has the freedom to do what they want during character creation, even if the choice will lead to certain failure. That's very in line with classic CRPGs, but it makes the game feel somewhat railroaded. Once your character is set on a path, there is no room for divergence. On my first character, I made the mistake of trying to emphasize combat while retaining minor competence in a variety of non-combat skills. My hope was to fight all the combat encounters I could handle and avoid the rest. This worked for a while, but as I explored the second major city in the game, I found myself falling behind. 5 hours into the game, I knew this character build wouldn't cut it. Normally this is where I would have given up with the Age of Decadence, but although it seems like a major obstacle to lose that much progress, I still found myself wanting to play the game some more. And that's a very good quality to have when character creation is so important. The game still needs to be fun even if you have to restart. I think there are 2 main reasons why the Age of Decadence manages to do this. The first is that different characters really do seem to result in different gameplay and quest paths. The amount of dialogue options that I couldn't take, and the various weapons and poisons that I couldn't use, and the crafting mechanics that I didn't even touch, were all novel experiences awaiting me. The game has the depth required to sustain interest. The second reason why the Age of Decadence is so replayable is perhaps my favorite feature in the game. It doesn't waste your time. It's filled with quick travel options on both the world and town maps. They're even embedded directly into the dialogues to allow you to skip the boring part and get straight to the fun. But it doesn't force you either. You can always choose to leave and take your own path. And this might seem like it kills all the wonder of exploring the area, but that's not true. The maps only mark major landmarks. You can still run around and discover quests and various things to do, but it removes the toil of going back and forth to areas you've already been to or trying to find a specific location in a large city. In other words, the tedium associated with the gameplay is minimized because you can skip most of what is tedious. After playing the Age of Decadence, I sincerely believe that this is something that every CRPG should have. Now let's talk a little bit about the combat. As you might expect from a game that doesn't hold your hand at all, it's brutally difficult, even more so than the classic CRPGs that inspired it. The reason for this is simple. You're only really supposed to fight if you're forced to, or if your character is designed to be a walking death machine. But what if you are a walking death machine? Well, the overall tactical depth of the combat system is still somewhat lacking due to the fact that there's only a single character you can control. This means that there's not much room for variation in how you play each battle. In fact, all the variation seems to arise as a result of encounter design. A mob of weak foes means using whirlwind attacks, lightly armored opponents means using fast attacks, and heavily armored opponents means using powerful attacks. It's strange because the existing game systems have the necessary depth for more interesting situations. The game supports things like aimed attacks that can injure and disarm, thrown weapons like nets to debilitate foes, and even alchemical concoctions to do various things. But the thing is, there's no option to make use of them in a meaningful way. Spending points into additional skills like throwing or alchemy would use up points that could be better spent on the main weapon and defense skills. When you only have one character, these sorts of situational abilities fall to the wayside, but it's only when you're forced to make these kinds of unique decisions that diverge from the standard plan that tactical turn-based combat really gets interesting. So while the combat in the Age of Decadence is serviceable and is a definite step up from a game like Fallout, it's still not as great as something like, say, Divinity Original Sin. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the presentation. The graphical quality is not great, particularly on the characters. Some of the environments actually look quite good, especially when you zoom out and the tilt shift effect kicks in. Still, it's a game made by 6 people, and you can tell. It's rough around the edges, the textures and the models seem to vary in terms of quality, the animations can be wonky, and there are some quirks with the UI. Personally, I don't think any of these things have as much of a bearing on the overall experience as the gameplay issues that I talked about before, but they are worth mentioning. Overall, I enjoyed the Age of Decadence, but it is the kind of game that is for a very specific niche audience, and it doesn't make any compromises in that respect. I feel like it might have been better if it did make some.